A secret facial operation everyone knows about, but not all the details. These details that have emerged in recent years have shocked all fans. Today we will break down all the details about the operation, the doctor, and the mysterious night. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, a living legend. His voice, his charisma, his signature hip movements, all of it became a symbol of an era. But what if behind this ideal, sparkling image hid a deep secret that went beyond his stage performances? What if the world's most famous face wasn't quite real? Our hero, it seemed, had all. Wild fame, boundless fan love, beauty that drove millions crazy. However, it turned out that behind the facade of perfection was an obsession that drove him to a desperate act. This story is not about music, but about a psychological drama, about the fear of losing control over one's own life and the image that had been built for years. It's about how a person who had everything risked it all to preserve an illusion. It was 1970. Elvis was no longer the boy who conquered the world in the 50s. His life was tumultuous and full of contradictions. Behind the stage, where he was king, were private problems related to addictions. He was experimenting with various substances, and the consequences began to show on his appearance. Fine wrinkles, swelling, injection marks. All of this was what he feared most. His face, his main brand, began to fail. He looked in the mirror and saw not a king, but an ordinary person who was aging and fighting his demons. This struggle was his biggest secret. It was at this time that Elvis made a decision that would have surprised the entire world if it had become known. He decided to have plastic surgery, but it wasn't a normal visit to the surgeon. It was a mission that required absolute secrecy. He had to appear at the clinic in a way that no one would know about his presence. Imagine, the most famous person on the planet hiding from paparazzi, from fans, from his own entourage, to change his face. It sounds like a Hollywood movie script, but it was part of his real life. He wanted to change the shape of his nose to hide the swelling and marks from the Botox injections he was using to maintain smooth skin. This manipulation of his own appearance was not just an attempt to rejuvenate, but a true psychological act. He sought to restore the ideal image that existed in the minds of millions. He believed that returning to the perfect face of the 50s would help him regain the same energy and the same strength he had at the beginning of his career. This obsession was so strong that he ignored all the doctor's warnings about the risks. Elvis felt that his face was the only thing he could control when his life was spiraling out of control. The clinic where the operation was to take place was located in California. Elvis arrived there at night, undercover. He used a pseudonym, and only a few people from his inner circle knew about his true intention. Everything was organized so as not to leave any traces. The doctor who performed the operation was a true professional, but even he could not guarantee a perfect result. The risk was enormous. If something went wrong, it could ruin his career, his image, everything he had worked for his entire life. The anesthesia was difficult for his body, which was exhausted from constant stress and addictions. When he came to, the first thing he asked for was a mirror to see the result. The surgeon, who witnessed his obsession, noted with surprise how focused Elvis was on the smallest details of his new appearance. Even during rehabilitation, he constantly studied himself, trying to find the perfect angle from which his face would look flawless. While most patients think about recovery, he was only thinking about his image. This process became a real ordeal for him. Every painful sensation reminded him of the price he was paying for perfection. He realized that he had become a hostage to his own image. This fear of destroying the illusion he had created for years was stronger than any physical pain. After the operation, Elvis had to hide the traces of the intervention. He wore dark glasses, hid his face from cameras. It was like a game of hide-and-seek where he was the main prize. He continued to perform, record songs, and star in movies, but behind every move of his was a secret. He carefully controlled who was looking at him and how. He was afraid that someone would notice the difference, that someone would realize that his nose had changed slightly, that his face had become more sculpted. Of course, fans noticed minor changes, but they explained it by weight changes or camera angles, not even suspecting the truth. Elvis deliberately changed angles, took photos with different lighting to confuse and convince everyone that he was fine. This story is not just about a plastic surgery. It's about a person's struggle with their own image. Elvis was not just a musician. He was a symbol, and this symbol had to be perfect. He felt that he had to live up to the expectations of millions of people who saw in him not just a person, but an idol. And when his own appearance began to fail him, he went to extreme measures to preserve this illusion. He didn't want his fans to see his weakness, his humanity. He wanted to remain a king who never ages and never loses his charm. This obsession with perfection turned his life into a one-man show, where he was both the director and the main character, and, ultimately, the victim. Even his closest friends, known as the Memphis Mafia, didn't fully understand the depth of his suffering, perceiving his constant anxieties as ordinary star whims. They saw only the tip of the iceberg, not suspecting how intense his inner struggle was. It seemed he was completely alone in his pursuit of perfection. His dependence on medical procedures was getting stronger, and it was becoming more and more difficult for him to hide it. This operation became known only after his death. Biographical books, memoirs of close people who dared to reveal this secret, shed light on this dark side of his life. This discovery shocked many. For some, it destroyed the ideal image of Elvis, and for others, on the contrary, it made him more human, showing that even kings have their weaknesses and their secrets. At this point, I would like to stop and ask you, do you think such measures were justified for the sake of preserving his image? How much does the pressure of fame force people to take such steps? Write your opinion in the comments. I am very curious what you think about this. Elvis's story shows how strong the obsession with appearance can be. In the modern world, where social media and perfect photos are the norm, this obsession takes on new forms. But in the 70s, when there was no such widespread dissemination of information, Elvis fought this problem almost alone. He was a prisoner of his own success, of his own beauty. His face was his prison. He constantly had to be in shape to look flawless. It was not just a professional duty, it was his life mission. He was looking for new methods to stop time, even despite dubious advice and high risks. Each new experiment gave him a brief feeling of control, which quickly disappeared, forcing him to look for new ways. This struggle with age was becoming more and more intense, turning into a vicious circle of dependence on procedures and chemicals. He trusted few people, and this secret became another burden on his shoulders. Every public appearance, every interview was a test for him. Will they notice? Will they ask about it? This fear constantly haunted him. It was a real psychological drama unfolding behind the scenes of his great life. But was the operation the only reason? Some biographers claim that in addition to the rhinoplasty, he also had other procedures. He was one of the first to use Botox injections to smooth out wrinkles. In those days, this was something completely new and experimental. He took great risks to preserve his youth and his flawless appearance. This secret shows that even the strongest and most influential people can be vulnerable and unhappy. This story is a reminder that a complex and painful reality often hides behind a perfect picture. Elvis wanted to be king not only on stage, but also in real life. And for this, he was ready for anything. He desperately tried to avoid aging and preserve his youth, which was an integral part of his image. And finally, I'm interested to know your opinion. Would your attitude towards Elvis have changed if you had found out about this operation while he was alive? Or would it just have added interest to his personality? Leave your thoughts in the comments.